Somewhere beyond the outer rim, in a part of the galaxy where no hyperlane dares to go, where even star maps blur out into uncertainty, there is a planet that no one remembers. Its name is Nowlor. It was never mentioned in the archives of the Jedi Temple, and yet it holds a stillness the Force once knew. This is where Kale Nerys chose to disappear, a man who once stood beneath temple spires, lightsaber in hand, voice steady in the face of war. A Jedi once, long ago, and now, something else entirely. Kale lives in a quiet dwelling made of stone and dried roots, tucked into a gentle slope at the edge of a vast, breathing garden. The roof sighs when the wind passes, the floor is always warm, and when it rains, the water falls in rhythmic chords on the carved wooden slats, like the hum of a long-forgotten lullaby. Each day begins not with purpose, but with presence. Kyle wakes when the moons shift. Nowlor has 8 of them, each rising in slow succession throughout the night and fading by morning. Their rhythms guide the flowers, their colors, blue, pale gold, violet gray, bathe the land in quiet tones. In this garden, everything listens. Some trees glow softly at dusk. Some vines pulse when touched. Tiny blossoms bloom only when sung to. The Force is here, but it does not command. It invites. Kyle walks the garden with bare feet and a simple robe, holding a hand-carved watering jug made from the husk of a fallen tree. He doesn't use the Force to lift rocks or move branches anymore. He moves slowly, because moving slowly matters here. There's a tree with leaves like flattened stars that opens only when the sky is cloudy. Beneath it, a tiny shoot has begun to rise. He doesn't remember planting it. He leans down to press his palm to the soil. It is warm, pulsing, alive, and it speaks to him, not in words, but in stillness. The same kind of stillness he once feared, back in the war, when silence meant danger. Now it's the thing he trusts the most. He doesn't think about his lightsaber much. It lies buried beneath a stone, deep in the farthest corner of the garden. Not hidden, just resting. He hasn't touched it in years. Not since he left. Not since the temple fell. Not since he stopped believing that to serve the Force meant to carry a weapon. Kale does not meditate in the traditional sense. He trims dead leaves. He boils tea from moonflowers. He listens to the air between bird calls. His meditation is in noticing. And yet, every so often, there is an ache in his chest that does not come from age or regret. It is a soft ache, the shape of a name he never says aloud, a youngling he once taught, a face he never saw again. The ache visits on cold mornings, or after rain, or when the moons align. One evening, as the 7th moon, Velra, rose above the treetops, casting long shadows in lavender light, Kale heard something unfamiliar. Footsteps. He stood still beneath the hanging branches of a trellis, heart quiet but alert. A figure approached through the garden path. Not a beast, not a villager, a girl, human, no more than 16. Her boots were worn. Her cloak held the reddish dust of travel, and in her hand, clutched tightly to her chest, was a broken lightsaber hilt, its metal pitted and dulled. She looked at him as if she already knew who he was. "You're one of them," she said quietly. He said nothing. "I found this," she continued, holding up the hilt, "in the ruins of a shuttle outside the old Republic trade lanes. It had a mark like yours." He looked at her eyes, not afraid, but asking. "My name is Sana." Kyle nodded once, gently, then turned toward the fire pit. He didn't speak, didn't question, didn't command. Instead, he added more wood to the fire. She followed slowly. They sat under the open dome, stars unbothered above them. The fire crackled. wind moved through the garden like a familiar animal, brushing past them both without hesitation. Sana held the hilt with both hands. "I don't know if I'm supposed to be a Jedi," she said at last. "I thought I wanted to be, but now, I don't know what that means anymore." Kale didn't answer. He didn't need to. Not yet. Tram, the old loth cat who lived beside Kale, padded out from behind the stones and curled beside the girl's boots. She looked down in surprise. Tram purred. "You live alone out here?" she asked. Kyle stirred the fire. "I don't think you're alone," she added after a moment. They sat like that for a long time. No lessons, no orders, no stories of heroism, just the sound of night settling. Later, Kale prepared a small cup of moonflower tea and passed it to her. She sipped without asking what was in it. Her shoulders softened. The moons shifted. The wind turned warmer. She asked quietly, "Can I stay here?" He didn't answer right away, but the garden did. A vine nearby uncurled its petals for the first time in many seasons, and Kyle, with a faint breath through his nose, simply nodded. Sana smiled, not the smile of a victory, but of a burden set down. It would be many days before she asked about his past, and many more before she told him hers. But that night, with the stars unblinking and the garden listening, nothing needed to be said. The Force was not loud here, but it was awake, and it was watching over them both. The morning after Sana arrived, the garden mist rose slower than usual. It hung just above the soil, wrapping around stones and roots like silk being pulled through water. Light trickled through the canopies in narrow beams. Every color was softened. Kyle moved through the garden with his usual rhythm, but with the quiet awareness of a second presence. He didn't look for Sana. He didn't call her name. He simply did what he always did, knelt at the base of the flowering moss near the stream, tested the warmth of the shallow pools, whispered to the herbs that only opened when sung to in tones of D. By mid-morning, she appeared beside him without a word. Her boots were off. She had tied her cloak at her waist and gathered her hair behind her head in a loose knot. Kale looked at her hands. She was carrying the broken saber again. He watched her set it down beside a moss-covered stone, as though it were something sacred and delicate, but not fragile. They worked together in silence. She handed him dried leaves. He passed her the long-handled pruning knife, blade dulled intentionally. There was nothing to learn, and everything to feel. The Force was quieter here than in any temple, but not absent. It moved in the pattern of falling petals, in the curve of roots curling around each other beneath the earth, in the sudden tilt of a bird's head when the wind changed direction. Later, as Kale prepared the midday brew from tree bark and mist crystals, Sana sat cross-legged beneath the memory tree. That's what the locals called it, though Kyle had never asked them why. Its bark was deep silver, and every few weeks it shed one of its long, ribbon-like leaves. Just one. She watched the tree carefully, and then, without warning, asked, "Did you fight in the Clone Wars?" Kyle didn't answer right away. He poured 2 cups. Sana didn't press him. She waited. Kyle sat on the earth beside her, handing her the cup. It was warm, slightly bitter. "I did," he said finally. His voice was even. Sana looked at the tree again. "Did you want to?" "No." "Did you run away?" "No." Her voice softened. "But you're here now." Kyle turned the cup in his hands. "I'm here because what we called peace was built on noise, orders, missions, targets. Peace didn't have time to grow." Sana nodded slowly. She touched one of the silver ribbons falling from the tree, but didn't pluck it. She said, My master died on a planet no one could pronounce. They sent her there because she refused to execute a retreating battalion. She said it wasn't the Jedi way. Kale didn't respond, but his breath shifted, just slightly. She told me to run, Sana added. I didn't listen. Tram appeared then, as if called by memory. The Lothcat climbed into Kyle's lap without hesitation. His purring filled the quiet that followed. You carry that story like a scar, Kyle said after a long time. Sana looked down. I don't know who I'm supposed to be, she whispered. I'm not sure there's anything left to be. Kyle's eyes were soft, the way water softens stone, not with force, but with time. Out here, he said, we don't ask who you were supposed to be. We only ask how gently you're willing to hold the world now. Sana let that sentence pass through her. She didn't respond, but her breathing slowed. The wind shifted again, brushing through the branches above. The silver leaf from the memory tree released. It floated downward, spinning as it came to rest between them. Neither reached for it. They simply watched it land. In the days that followed, Sana helped Kyle with everything. She learned how to grind root powder without bruising it, how to wake the water lilies without touch, how to tell when the night vines were hungry for light. She began rising earlier than him. He found her one morning, meditating beside the stream, eyes closed, hands open, not in the rigid form of the temple, but in the relaxed posture of someone finally asking questions instead of reciting answers. She didn't speak of the order again, not for a while, and Kale never asked. Instead, they studied the paths of migrating skyfish that swam through the low clouds during full moons. They watched the fungi that glowed pink before storms. Kale taught her how to record wind changes using colored threads tied to branches. He told her that listening to nature was not about control, it was about pattern. You can sense a coming rain, not because you force it, he said, but because you've sat still long enough to feel the rhythm. Sana had once believed strength came from precision, in forms, in lightsaber combat, in mastery of technique. Here, she learned that strength might also come from surrender. In one corner of the garden stood a half-collapsed archway. It had no known purpose. The villagers said it had always been there, moss-covered, leaning, useless. Kale called it the gate that leads nowhere. And every evening, as the sun dipped, Sana would sit beside it and sketch in a small book she never showed Kyle. He didn't ask to see it. But sometimes, he saw her pages carried outlines of leaves, roots, small poems written in Arabesh. One day, as the rain came in with a soft hush, Kyle returned from the far edge of the garden to find Sana asleep beneath the gate. Her hands folded across her chest, her saber hilt resting beside her like a broken relic with no home. But she was smiling. It wasn't the smile of victory. It was the smile of arrival, of someone who, for once, no longer needed to ask where they were going. The moons moved through their phases slowly. On Nowlor, they didn't rise all at once. They took turns, like caretakers taking watch, lighting the garden one section at a time. Each moon had its own color, its own pull on the tide, its own effect on the soil. The seventh moon, Velra, always returned with lavender light and the scent of ripened moss. The sixth, Siren, was silver blue and called the fireflies from their hiding. Tonight, it was Drexel's turn, the fourth moon, deep amber, low and wide, a moon of reflection, the kind of light that turns every surface into a mirror if you sit still long enough. Sana had begun to sit by the reflection pool beneath the Drexel moon. Each time it came, she didn't say what she thought about there. Kale didn't ask. He only watched from the walkway made of flat stones, as she sat with her knees drawn up, watching the surface ripple with the wind. Sometimes she hummed, not a tune Cale recognized, not a melody of the temple or of the village nearby. It was slow, almost breathless, the kind of sound someone makes when they're not trying to sing, just letting memory come out in pieces. Tram would join her sometimes, curling up by her side, blinking lazily at the stars reflected in the pool. Kyle stood by the moss wall near the herb terrace that evening, trimming leaves from the singing grass when Sana said, without turning, "I don't dream about her anymore." Cale paused his hands, listened. Sana turned slightly, still watching the pool. "My master," she continued. "There was a time I saw her face every night. I'd wake up before it faded, but now..." She let the sentence drift. Cale placed the shears beside the basket. "You think forgetting is a failure," he said gently. She didn't answer, but the stillness in her breath was enough. He stepped beside her, watching the same pool. "There's a kind of memory that doesn't come in pictures," he said. "It's quieter than that. It lives in what you choose to care for." She looked at her reflection. "Then maybe I still remember her," she whispered, "even if her voice is gone." Cale said nothing more. He let her sit there as long as she wanted, and when she rose finally, she left the saber hilt behind on the stone. The wind picked up, moving across the pool like a breath over glass. There was a stone table on the southern edge of the garden, where the light always lingered longer than expected. Kyle used to sit there, alone. Now, Sana joined him each morning, their meals simple: herb cakes, soft root broth, dried fruit from the climbing vines. One morning, as they broke bread in silence, Sana placed a wrapped cloth beside Cale's bowl. He unwrapped it. Inside, the broken saber, restored, not active, not repowered, but repaired. She had reforged the housing using the garden's cooled ore. Etched a new phrase in the grip, "Only gently now." He looked up at her. She didn't smile, but there was peace behind her eyes. That was enough. "It doesn't need to be a weapon anymore," she said. Kyle ran his fingers over the carved inscription. "That was never its purpose," he replied. They left the saber in the garden's center after that, near the tree that only bloomed when someone spoke to it kindly, not buried, not hidden, just placed, as if it too was allowed to rest. Rain came 3 nights later, a slow, soaking rain that blanketed the trees and made the stones sing softly underfoot. It fell for hours without hurry, the kind of rain that listens for your breath and doesn't mind waiting. Kyle lay in his sleeping nook, near the circular window carved with moons, when he heard footsteps. Not Sana's, not boots, feet, bare, careful. Then a voice, cracked by time. "You're the one they whispered about, aren't you?" Kyle rose slowly, pulling his robe over his shoulders. The figure standing in his doorway was older than him, not by years, but by wear. A man from the nearby village, one of the stoneworkers, face lined by decades, hands wrapped in cloth. "I've watched that garden bloom for 30 seasons, the man said. "Didn't think I'd see anyone new in it." Kyle nodded. "She brings something different," he said. The man nodded slowly. "She healed the bird," he added. "The little one with the shattered wing. No force tricks, just thread, steady fingers." Cale looked past him, into the night. "The garden teaches us," he said. "We only listen." The man left without another word, but Cale stood there for a long while, watching the rain fall between the eaves, thinking not of the temple, not of the war, but of the way Sana had started humming again. Not quietly this time, with rhythm, with intention. The kind of song you sing when your body finally believes the world might want you in it. And outside, the garden shimmered, not from the rain, but from something even quieter. That morning, a vine bloomed out of season. It curled up the side of the herb wall, opened in a blue Kale had never seen before, something between twilight and ocean. No villager had planted it. No map of the garden recorded its name. Sana discovered it first. She knelt beside it, running her fingers gently along the velvet petals, and whispered something to it. She never told Kale what she said, but later that day, the bloom had turned toward her window, as if to listen. Kale took it as a sign, not from the Force, not from destiny, just from life, responding to kindness. The villagers visited more often now. They didn't knock. They didn't ask permission. They came as one might approach a wellspring, softly, reverently, bearing offerings that didn't require explanation. A child left a woven ring of reed grass on the doorstep. An elder brought honey root paste wrapped in cloth. One night, a boy no older than 10 arrived after moonrise with a bird cupped in both hands. Its wing was bent wrong, its feathers wet. Sana didn't ask questions. She just took the bird, whispered something to it the way she always did, and disappeared into the low room near the sleeping nook where the sun came in sideways. She didn't emerge until morning. Kale found her asleep beside the bird, now resting on a folded blanket, wing-bound in woven fiber, Tram curled up against both of them, snoring softly. Sana's face was at peace. That kind of peace Kyle hadn't seen on anyone since before the temple fell. The kind that isn't the absence of war, but the absence of performance. One afternoon, beneath the third moon's long light, Kale took her to the far edge of the garden, past the terraced stone beds, beyond the moss towers and wind-cut arches, to the place where his saber was buried. They walked in silence. The ground was soft from rain. Their footsteps sank slightly into the moss. When they reached the flat stone, he stopped. "I never told you what I buried," he said. "I know," Sana replied. Her voice wasn't surprised. Kale knelt and brushed aside the pale lichen that had grown across the stone surface. His fingers moved like a ritual, like someone turning pages in a book written in a language only memory could read. He didn't dig. He just rested his hand there. "It was my weapon," he said. "But not the way you'd think." Sana didn't speak. He traced a finger through the moss. "I used it well, precisely. I followed orders, protected innocence, killed when I had to. But the most dangerous thing I ever did was believe that was the only way to serve." Sana sat beside him. "I buried it not to forget," Kyle continued, "but to remind myself what peace actually costs." The garden wind moved through the trees with a breath-like hush. Sana ran her fingers through the moss beside his. They sat that way for a long time, and when they stood to leave, neither looked back at the stone. It wasn't necessary anymore. In the middle of the 7th moon cycle, Kyle became ill. Nothing loud, no fever, just a weariness that settled deeper than his muscles, a kind of tired that didn't ask to be solved, only acknowledged. He slept more, walked less. Sana took over the morning tending. The plants responded to her as if they'd always known her name. She didn't panic, didn't cry. She simply sat beside him in the evenings and read from old field journals Kale had kept, entries written in shorthand, detailing rainfall patterns, blossom behavior, root structures. She read them like scripture. He'd wake sometimes to the sound of her voice, gentle and steady, listing petal lengths and soil temperatures. And then he'd sleep again, warmed not by blankets, but by her presence. She didn't leave his side. not once. It was during one of these long, quiet evenings that he asked her a final question. "Have you forgiven yourself yet?" Sana didn't answer immediately. The hearth was burning low, the flames just embers wrapped in sighs. "I'm not sure I know how," she said. Kale's voice was a whisper. "Then try this." She leaned closer. "Ask the garden." He closed his eyes and drifted. The next morning, Sana woke early. She moved through the garden as she always did, her hands dusted with pollen, her sleeves damp with dew. Tram followed her, pausing occasionally to sniff a stone or stretch in the sunlight. She passed by the reflection pool, paused. A single silver ribbon from the memory tree had fallen overnight. It lay on the surface of the water, unmoving, unbothered by wind or gravity. Sana knelt beside it, closed her eyes. She reached inward, not to summon power, not to command the force, but to listen. And the answer came, not in words, not in visions, but in a warmth that moved through her like moonlight finding a hidden path. She opened her eyes and whispered, "I forgive you." She didn't know if she meant herself, or Kale, or the galaxy. But the moment she said it, the silver ribbon sank gently below the surface, and the pool glowed softly in reply. Time folded in on itself after that. Sana no longer counted the days by moonrise or harvest. The garden had become her calendar. The blooming of certain vines told her when to begin the seed grind. The return of the night moths meant she could collect nectar again. Everything was measured not by hours, but by presence. The villagers began calling her by a new name. They no longer said the girl from the stars or the apprentice. They called her healer in the garden. Not because she healed others, though she did in quiet ways, but because they could see the garden healing through her. She had stopped wearing her old robes. They now hung on a branch inside the stone dwelling, gently swaying with the breeze that flowed through the doorway. She dressed in woven cloth from the villagers, tunics dyed with ground moss and berry. Nothing bright, nothing loud, just colors the garden already knew. Each morning, she walked barefoot through the sleeping blossoms and whispered good morning, not a ritual, a conversation. One evening, as the moons rose two at a time, an alignment that happened only once every 70 cycles, Sana stood at the edge of the path, watching a shadow form on the ridgeline. A ship, old, rusted. She recognized the shape. Not Republic, but close. Civilian modifications. Light weapon ports, but nothing active. No insignia. It landed in the outer field, just beyond the marsh lights. She waited. She didn't run. She didn't reach for the saber. She walked, slow, deliberate, the way Kale had taught her. When the ship's hatch hissed open, only one figure stepped out. Not a soldier, not an inquisitor, just a man in a worn flight jacket, missing his left sleeve, holding a data pad to his chest like a shield. "You're the one," he said. "The Force led me here." Sana tilted her head slightly. "Led you?" His voice cracked with sincerity, not desperation. "I've been trying to find a Jedi, not to ask for protection, not for help, just to tell the truth." She said nothing. He swallowed. "I defected from the first unit that bombed Hosnian Prime. I filed false reports, buried things I couldn't unsee, and I can't hold it anymore." Sana's face didn't shift, but her breath softened. "I don't want to be forgiven," he said. "I just want someone to witness what I did, what I regret." Sana motioned for him to follow her. No speech, no judgment. She walked the path back to the garden, and the man followed like someone approaching a place he never believed was real. That night, the man slept in the outer alcove, the one where the wind sang low and kind. Sana sat by the fire, holding Kale's journal, the one with entries scribbled in the corners, half-finished thoughts, notes about plant behavior, and the curve of starlight over petals. She flipped to a blank page and wrote, "Today, someone came not for answers, but to be seen." Then, below it, "I think that's what peace really is. Not perfection, just space to be honest." The page glowed faintly as she wrote. Ink infused with dried moonflower powder always did that. Only briefly, as if the paper acknowledged the weight of the truth it had been asked to carry. She folded the journal shut. The fire snapped once, then fell into a low purr of embers. Sana rested her hand on the floor. The earth was warm beneath her. And she knew, without needing a vision or a voice, that Kale was still with her. Not in ghost, not in forced specter, but in the way the garden continued to bloom where he once stood. At sunrise, she brought the man a bowl of broth. He sat with it cupped between his hands, silent. "They never told me about Jedi like you," he said. Sana glanced sideways. "They said you were warriors, that you led armies, that you crushed empires." She shrugged gently. "Maybe some did, but not you?" She stirred her own bowl. "I think I came here to forget how to fight, and instead, I remembered how to feel." He looked at her with something like awe, but quieter, maybe even envy. Then he asked, "Is that what the Force wants?" Sana paused, lifting her gaze to the sky above. The 7th moon was fading, the 8th just beginning to rise, pale and thin like breath in cold air. "I don't think the Force wants anything," she said. "I think it waits. For stillness, for kindness, for people to stop trying to use it and just sit with it." The man nodded, not in understanding, but in willingness. She left him there with the garden, and it welcomed him. That night, as Sana returned to the stone dwelling, she paused beside the memory tree. Another silver ribbon had fallen. She picked it up, held it to her chest, and said quietly, "Thank you, Master Kyle. I'm still listening." A breeze answered her, not cold, just present. And in the silence that followed, the leaves above her shimmered without moving. The villagers began calling her Watcher of the Moon Roots. No one ever explained why. Perhaps it was because she often sat beside the grove where the moon roots bloomed, their pale tendrils curling up from beneath the earth in spirals that reflected the exact alignment of Nalor's moons. Or maybe it was because she listened more than she spoke, the way one listens when the world itself is speaking. She never corrected them. By then, Sana had stopped thinking of herself in titles. She no longer felt the weight of apprentice, survivor, or exile. She tended to the garden. She learned its patterns. She mapped wind by thread and color. She whispered to the moss when it was dry. She still had Kale's journal. She had started her own. They rested side by side on a stone shelf near the sleep nook. One written in measured looping script, the other in slanted strokes, impatient but careful. The garden did not compare them. It held them both. One morning, during the quiet season when the first 3 moons dipped low and the sky remained lavender for most of the day, Sana found a child waiting at the edge of the path. He couldn't have been older than 7. No shoes, eyes wide. A small bundle in his hands wrapped in worn canvas. He didn't speak, just held it out to her. Inside, a cracked kyber crystal, faintly pulsing, not steady. Sana crouched low. "Where did you find this?" The boy pointed up, toward the mountains. There were no mountains on the maps, but the garden said nothing. So Sana nodded, and the boy sat down near the moss wall and waited while she took the crystal inside. She didn't try to mend it. She didn't place it in the old saber hilt. She sat with it in her hands for a long while. Then, she placed it in a bowl of warm mineral water, whispered a word, and let it rest beneath the sunlight that passed through the stained glass Kyle had once built from discarded memory shards. By nightfall, it had stopped flickering. It no longer pulsed like a wound. It just glowed. Word spread quietly, the kind of spreading that doesn't happen through message beacons or encoded relays, the kind of spreading that travels through stars in the way heat moves through stone, slow, persistent, inevitable. A girl who listens to crystals, a healer who speaks to vines, a garden where the force doesn't demand, only invites. They came one by one, a woman missing half her sight, a man with fingers scorched from broken circuitry, a non-binary pilot who carried a braid that wasn't theirs anymore, but couldn't throw it away. None stayed forever. Most stayed for a cycle, maybe two. But while they were there, they were, fully, unquestioned. And in the evenings, Sana would sit beneath the wind arch and read from Kale's notes aloud, not because they needed answers, but because the sound of remembered curiosity had become its own kind of comfort. One night, when a faint mist rolled in from the marshlands and the eighth moon rose with a barely there shimmer, the crystal from the boy's bundle began to hum, just once, soft, like a breath. Sana placed her hand above it, not to touch, just to acknowledge. She dreamed that night, not of war, not of the temple. She dreamed of water, still clear water spread across endless moss. She stood barefoot on a small stone platform. Around her, figures of light shimmered in and out, not ghosts, not visions, just memory shaped like presence. Among them, Kyle. He didn't speak. He smiled and bowed, then faded into the wind. Sana woke with tears on her cheeks and a warmth in her chest that didn't hurt anymore. The next morning, the villagers brought her an offering. Not food, not tools, a mirror, carved from obsidian and silver bark, light as a leaf, but cold to the touch. They had never given it to Kale. "We think it's time," one of them said. Sana held it carefully, uncertain. She took it back to the dwelling and placed it on the wall opposite the journal shelf. It did not show her reflection right away. Only light, filtered, diffused, as if waiting for her to look, not at herself, but through herself. She whispered, "Thank you." And the mirror shimmered in reply. She began planting again, not just tending what Kale had left, but cultivating new terraces along the eastern edge, places where the roots curved in ways they hadn't before. New seeds. Ones she found in the folds of her own journals, a flower with petals like glass, a vine that only grew in response to singing, a tree whose bark formed spirals like the galaxies she once studied from a temple library window. When the first of these new blooms opened, it had no scent. But when the wind passed through it, it sounded like two voices humming in harmony. Sana knelt beside it, not to name it, only to listen. There was a morning when nothing stirred, no birdsong, no mist. Even the wind held its breath. Sana stepped outside with a bundle of crushed bark to feed the ember pit, but paused at the threshold. The quiet wasn't absence, it was attention. The garden was listening to something. She moved through the paths slowly, each footfall more suggestion than step. Tram trailed behind her, his ears twitching not from alarm, but from curiosity. Near the northern pool, beneath the third moon's retreating light, someone was standing, not a traveler, not a villager. He wore black, but not empire black. His robes were faded and layered like wind-worn parchment. His belt held no saber. His hair was gray at the temples. His hands were empty, but his presence was not. Sana stood a few paces away. Her voice didn't rise. "You've come a long way." He nodded. She watched him. His posture wasn't combative. His shoulders were tired. "I heard there was a place where Jedi were still allowed to grieve," he said. Her breath softened. "They are." He turned and his face carried the weight of entire histories. Not shame, not guilt, just where. "I was there, during the fall," he said. "I saw the order tear itself from within, and I stayed silent." Sana didn't speak. He stepped forward, one slow motion at a time, like someone afraid of waking the world. "I was never hunted. I wasn't known. I slipped away before the blood turned cold." He paused beside a blossom opening near his feet, its petals folded back with a sigh. "I tried to become ordinary," he said, "but something in me never stopped humming." Sana nodded once. "The Force doesn't leave, even when we do." He knelt beside the flower. "I haven't touched it in 20 years, he said, "but every time I closed my eyes, I still felt the river." Sana joined him, resting on her heels. "Then maybe," she said softly, "you didn't run. Maybe you waited." The wind passed between them like an exhale of old grief. He looked at her, something unsaid gathering behind his eyes. "I thought we were gone," he said. "I thought there was no one left." "There isn't," she said. "But something is." He nodded. The garden, sensing the moment, opened another blossom nearby, one with white edges and a glowing throat. It leaned slightly toward him. He reached out, slowly, and pressed his palm to the earth. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Just the hush of soil and wind, and the breath of roots beneath stone. He stayed for 4 cycles. He never said his name. She never asked. But in the final week, he helped reshape one of the eastern terraces. He laid stone by hand, fitted moss between each crack. His steps became lighter, his breath deeper. When he left, Sana walked him back to the ship. At the ramp, he turned once. "You're not the last Jedi," he said. Sana tilted her head. "I know," she replied, "but you're the first one I've seen remember why we were Jedi." He bowed, not formal, not ceremonial, just a quiet acknowledgement between 2 souls who had walked long roads alone. Then he was gone, and the garden did not mourn. It remembered. She marked the seasons not by leaves, but by stories. Each visitor brought one. Some left theirs buried beneath the roots. Others told them in fragments, scattered across days. A few never said anything aloud. But their hands gave it away, the way they tended, the way they held seeds like forgiveness. Sana collected them in memory. She didn't write them down. Some stories lived better in the air between silences. Kale's journal was full now. So was hers. Neither needed to be added to. They simply existed, side by side. Testament not to endings, but to continuation. One morning, a small ship landed without warning. It shimmered silver in the early light. No markings, no announcement. From its belly stepped a girl, no older than Sana had been when she arrived, wrapped in a jacket several sizes too large, hair cropped short, eyes wary. She carried nothing, no bag, no weapon, just herself. Sana met her at the gate. The girl didn't speak. She only looked around, as if searching for something she'd dreamed of, but didn't believe until now. Sana smiled. "Welcome," she said, and the girl, without knowing why, began to cry. Not the loud kind. The kind that comes when your body finally stops running. That night, Sana sat by the crystal that once belonged to the boy from the mountains. It still glowed. She held it in her palm and whispered, "Thank you for coming back." And the crystal pulsed. Once, as if to say, "I never left." Years passed without numbers. Some came to the garden seeking rest, others seeking truth. A few came for neither and found both. Sana stayed. She became a fixture not only of the soil and stone, but of the air itself. The villagers stopped referring to her by titles. There was no need. When they spoke of her, it was simply as the one who listens. The garden had expanded by then, not in size, but in spirit. There were new paths, ones the wind had made, new growth along the outer ridges, where silence grew deepest. The moons shifted through their patient cycles. The 8th moon, Mira, now glowed slightly different, or so they said, a bit softer, a bit warmer. Some swore it mirrored the light from the garden below. Sana didn't confirm it. She didn't need to. Some truths were meant to be felt, not proven. One evening, the girl who had arrived without a name sat beside the memory tree. She was taller now, wiser in her shoulders. She had begun helping with the herb terraces, tracing wind with her fingertips, mapping cloud shapes for rainfall. "Do you miss it?" she asked. Sana looked up from the page she was writing in. "Miss what?" "The temple." Sana set the quill down. "I miss the quiet it promised," she said, "but not the noise it created." The girl nodded. "I think I would have liked being a Jedi," she said. "You already are," Sana replied. The girl blinked. "But I've never been trained." "You've listened," Sana said. "You've stayed curious. You've chosen gentleness when you could have chosen anger." She smiled faintly. "That's more training than most ever get." The girl looked down, then slowly, carefully, reached into her tunic and pulled out a smooth shard of crystal, not a saber core, not a relic, just a fragment, dull, dusty, carried because it meant something. "May I leave it here?" she asked. Sana nodded. The girl knelt and pressed the shard into the soil beneath the arch, where Kyle once buried his weapon. The earth accepted it. No flash, no music, just a deep, slow stillness. And then the breeze returned. The night of Sana's last moon alignment, the sky was clear. All 8 moons rose in perfect harmony, one by one, until the garden glowed in full circle light. She sat at the reflection pool, now rimmed in new blossoms. Her hand rested on the old saber hilt, still dormant, still waiting. She didn't ignite it. She never had. It wasn't what it was for anymore. Instead, she turned the hilt over once in her palm and laid it down in the water. It sank gently, no resistance, and where it landed, the pool shimmered gold for just a moment. The girl watched from a distance. No words were exchanged, none were needed. In the seasons that followed, the garden kept growing, and stories kept arriving, some whispered by wind, others left in baskets tied with vine, a few carved into bark, half erased by rain, but never quite gone. Sana remained for many years after that night. Then, one morning, she was not seen tending the terraces, not in the herb walk, not near the moss wall, but in the wind, the villagers said. There was something new, a note, a hum, a song only gardens know. And when they searched the old dwelling, they found the 2 journals side by side, Kale's, hers, and a third, blank, waiting. In time, the girl became a woman. She took over the tending. She listened. She hummed. She never asked to be called anything at all. And when a traveler arrived broken and uncertain, she simply said, "You're welcome to rest here. There's no path to follow, only room to be." And the traveler would sit, and the garden would begin again.